Day 1. Xi Jinping sits in his office, flanked by his top military advisors. Among them is Wang Hubin, the leader of the People's Liberation Army, or PLA's rocket force. That group will prove crucial to the day's events, as it's the rocket force missiles that Xi will rely upon to conduct a quick-fire smash-and-grab raid on an island nation that he has claimed as China's ever since he came to power. Taiwan will finally be under Chinese control. His strategy starts with a two-pronged attack. China will use its missiles to attack the Quemoy, along with several other small islands close to the Taiwanese mainland, at the same time that it strikes the Penghu Islands. Quemoy, also known as Kinmen, is the priority. The island's small beaches are still covered in anti-landing spikes, with anti-aircraft batteries lying beyond their dunes. The houses beyond those beaches still carry the bullet holes of an attempted invasion in 1949, again by China, that ultimately failed. Though the PLA managed to push inland on Quemoy, it quickly ran out of food and munitions, resulting in the deaths and capture of the entire invading force. Xi understands this historic humiliation well. It's one of the reasons why he spent his entire tenure as China's president engineering rapid modernization and growth of his nation's military. The PLA that'll invade today is far stronger than the PLA that attempted to take Taiwan in 1949. Quemoy is different too. It's now home to a host of Taiwanese stations and bases that collectively host 55,000 troops, about a quarter of Taiwan's active military. These stations are scattered on 12 islands that sit on the southeastern coast of the Fujian province. Beyond those islands lies about 170 miles of the Taiwan Strait, upon which Xi will rely to transport his ground forces into Taiwan once he's taken the islands. As for the Penghu Islands, they're more a difficult prospect. This collection of 64 islands is within the Taiwan Strait and already jointly administered by Taiwan and China. Xi's target here is Penghu, an offshore island that's home to one of Taiwan's 6 Skybow missile bases. Its surface-to-air defenses will prove problematic for the PLA and its air force if left unchecked, so it needs to be taken out quickly to ensure safer passage to the Taiwanese mainland. Xi already has his strategy in place: a missile barrage. China has the world's largest ground-based missile force in the world, and it'll use that advantage to its fullest while attacking Quemoy and the Penghu missile base. Xi gives the signal to start the attack. Ground-launched cruise missiles accompany short-range ballistic missiles, all fired from recently expanded military airfields that sit inside China's Fujian province. Longtian, Jiangsu, and Hui'an will prove vital to the attack, with each sitting within 200 miles of Taipei. Those bases are also the launching points for China's fleet of Shenyang J-16 and Sukhoi Su-30 multi-role fighter jets, each equipped with missiles that'll be used to conduct more targeted attacks on Penghu and Quemoy. When the initial missile barrage is over, China makes heavy use of its stockpile of HN-2 missiles, the only cruise missiles that are in its army's arsenal, to follow up on the ballistic missile attacks. HN-2s remain within the Earth's atmosphere after launch, making them more difficult for Taiwanese anti-air defenses to detect. Even when these ballistic missiles are shot out of the sky, they still hit their targets to devastate Taiwanese defenses. But there's more. A naval formation led by the Shandong aircraft carrier sails within Chinese waters on the country's side of the Davis Line. This line has served as a theoretical border between China and Taiwan within the strait for many years. Today, Xi crossed that line. But the ships don't cross immediately. Instead, Shandong provides another launching point for China's Air Force, with the ships and submarines that accompany it also launching missiles at Beijing's 2 main targets. Collectively, the fleet moves in tight formation. Each ship's crew has been training for just this moment, with China's repeated military operations in the Taiwan Strait revealing just how far they could push without forcing a Taiwanese response. Once Penghu and Quemoy are captured, these will be the first ships that China uses to form a barrier around Taiwan, fencing the island nation in, and hopefully for Xi, helping him provide safe passage for his troops to the Taiwanese mainland. Missile after missile strikes. Penghu's anti-air defenses are overwhelmed, with the missiles it fires in response rarely hitting targets. Even those that make it through are mostly shot down by anti-air defenses fitted into the 3 coastal bases China has spent the last few years building. Quemoy faces an even worse fate. China's missile barrage is too much for the 55,000 troops scattered around its islands to face. Towns are devastated. The old defenses lining island coasts prove useless as there's no Chinese landing, just missile after missile, slowly chipping away and wreaking havoc. The initial barrage is over. Taiwan's first and second lines of defense have been decimated, clearing the way for Xi to start landing troops onto the destroyed islands. Day 2. Taiwan's President Tsai Ing-wen has spent her morning assessing the damage caused by China's sneak attack. She knew an attack was coming. President Xi hadn't been shy about expressing his thoughts about Taiwan needing to be reunified with China sooner rather than later. Nevertheless, the attack was devastating. PLA troops have started to land on Quemoy and Penghu. The Taiwanese troops fighting on those islands commit to their cause valiantly, but they'll be overrun quickly. President Tsai has to accept these islands as lost and focus instead on the Taiwanese mainland. Though China has taken several tactically important islands, Tsai knows that Taiwan has many natural defenses playing in its favor. She knows that China isn't likely to risk an invasion via Taiwan's east coast. While its navy is more than capable of sailing around the island nation and will do so to create a naval blockade, any invading force has to deal with the massive cliffs that line almost the entirety of Taiwan's eastern border. Scaling those cliffs isn't impossible. Their gradients are at least 15%, which doesn't make them impossible, but climbing them while facing a constant barrage from Taiwanese troops would lead to massive casualties for the PLA. Plus, any PLA forces that try to take advantage of the passes and their tunnels that Taiwan has built into the cliffs to provide access to Taiwan's major population centers will be met with fierce resistance. They'll be forced into choke points, with Taiwan's troops able to pick them off at will. As a last resort, Tsai can always order the destruction of those passes and tunnels to prevent Chinese incursion. Still, she orders the troops on the east coast to be on alert. China may try its luck. Taiwan has to show that the cliff-lined coast is a no-go for the PLA. Instead, Tsai's immediate response focuses on Taiwan's west coast, which is closest to China. There are advantages there too. Taiwan has 15 major ports and harbors, though only 4 deep-water ports handle international maritime trade. Those ports would be likely landing and docking points for China's navy, so she can't allow them to fall into enemy hands. She orders their destruction. The ports can always be rebuilt, and China's naval blockade will prevent Taiwan's partners from ferrying goods onto the island anyway. She makes this choice because she knows that destroying the ports will make it much harder for the Chinese troops to land, affording Taiwan more time to prepare its internal defenses. Still, China can and likely will land via the beaches that line Taiwan's west coast. There's little that Tsai can do about that beyond ensuring those beaches are heavily fortified. And again, she can take advantage of Taiwan's geography. In many cases, the waters that lead into those beaches are shallow, often being less than 50 feet deep, meaning China can't deliver troops using large ships. Instead, they'll have to take an approach akin to the D-Day landings of the Second World War. Troops can be transported en masse up to a point, but then must be ferried onto the beaches in smaller vessels. All the while, Taiwan can bombard China's vessels with long-range missiles and air attacks, not only slowing down China's invasion, but hopefully destroying boats that contain stockpiles of food and ammunition that would keep any invading ground forces running once they reach Taiwan. Tsai's goal is simple: turn China's invasion into a war of attrition that will slowly sap the PLA's strength and force them to turn back. But to make that strategy work in the face of constant missile barrages and the PLA's sheer size, she'll need the help of an ally. Tsai makes a call to the President of the United States. Day 3. President Joe Biden contemplates his next move. The United States has long been an ally of Taiwan. He strengthened that relationship further in August 2023 when he approved $80 million in foreign military financing paid for by the American taxpayer to go straight to Taiwan as part of the Taiwan Relations Act. China wasn't happy about that move. Its foreign ministry said as much, comparing the grant to an arms sale that harmed China's sovereignty and security interests, while undermining the peace throughout the Taiwan Strait. Biden can't help but consider that this move had prompted the Chinese invasion, though he tried to dispel that thought from his mind. Xi had been talking about this for years. It's why the US delivered so much money and weapons to Taiwan in the first place. Still, he couldn't get the words that had come from the Chinese Defense Ministry in the wake of his announcement out of his mind. We will take all necessary measures to resolutely counter this. Perhaps this invasion was the necessary measure. Either way, Biden now has a choice. China's naval blockade is already having an impact on trade. If it's allowed to continue, it'll affect practically every American industry because Taiwan's responsible for producing around 60% of the world's semiconductors. Supply chains are grinding to a halt, and worse yet, a Chinese victory places those semiconductors in Beijing's hands. Bad news for Western business. He also has to think about the American people's wishes. More of them would support American deployments in support of Taiwan now than in 2015. Then 28% said America should support the island nation if China made a move. As recently as 2021, that support has risen to 52%. And of course, Biden knows he's made several comments in the past suggesting he'll send in troops. Back in September 2021, He claimed that the US has a commitment to doing just that, rather than simply a commitment to provide Taiwan with the means to defend itself. That was a blunder, but it also highlights his real feelings on the subject. While the American people might be split down the middle, Biden simply can't afford to allow China to take Taiwan. It's not just semiconductor trade. China succeeding in its invasion would be a propaganda nightmare, with Beijing achieving a major military victory that can prop up Xi's claims that he's upsetting global geopolitics for years to come. It's better to fight back now and solve that problem before China gets any more big ideas. But America isn't going to be able to do it alone. China's naval blockade might not have the sheer tonnage of America's navy, but it is strong enough to put up a good fight. Besides, the US will need somewhere to prepare before it pushes into the Taiwan Strait. Thankfully, America has developed a trilateral security agreement with South Korea and Japan for situations just like this. He picks up the phone and calls the Japanese Prime Minister, Fumio Kishida. Biden's job is to convince Japan that fighting the Chinese invasion now is in Japan's best interests. Otherwise, a strengthened China could seriously threaten Japan's sovereignty. Day 4. Xi is satisfied so far. The quick-fire missile attacks on Penghu and Quemoy were successful. China has essentially taken control of both islands, though its troops are still involved in sporadic fighting. The Taiwanese are as dedicated to their nationalism as their rhetoric claims. But Xi knows the two islands that were his first targets don't have the numbers to defend themselves successfully. For the next few days, he'll focus on consolidating his position in preparation for a full ground assault. He's already ordered his rocket force to pepper the mainland with precision missile strikes, but he is holding back. Even though China has the largest missile stockpile in the world, he doesn't want to burn through the whole lot now in case he gets drawn into a longer conflict. He doesn't want to be left without usable missiles at a critical juncture. For now, the priorities are to clear the Taiwan Strait and surround the island so that aid can't come in. Xi's navy, supported by his air force, is meticulous in its endeavors. Jets launch from China's 3 renewed bases at regular intervals, conducting flyby attacks on any Taiwanese vessels found in the Taiwan Strait. Those smash-and-grab attacks are aided by the Shandong aircraft carrier, which provides a landing base for those craft to refuel and get back into the fight. Xi uses his fleet of 62 submarines, though not all at once, to scour the strait and surrounding waters for signs of the 4 submarines that Taiwan's navy has. Those subs aren't a major threat, but getting them out of the way now is better so they can't create gaps in Xi's blockade. Speaking of which, Xi already has ships forming a perimeter around Taiwan with 49 destroyers, 72 corvettes, 42 frigates, and over 150 patrol vessels in his navy. Xi has plenty to choose from. Most won't be needed for the perimeter, giving Xi enough leftover naval assets to continue proper defenses along the Chinese coast. In a few more days, China will be ready for the next stage of the assault, attacking the mainland. Days 10 to 30. The Taiwan Strait is clear. It took a little longer than Xi anticipated. Taiwan commissioned its first and second mine-laying squads in 2022 and sowed ship-sinking mines throughout the strait. But this was a fairly new strategy for Taiwan, and the mines laid weren't so numerous that the PLA's navy couldn't handle them. Beijing lost a few ships, but Xi anticipated the mines and deployed minesweeping vessels equipped with special wires to cut the tethers attaching the mines to the seabed, allowing China's navy to destroy most of what was there. At the very least, Xi has several clear routes to the mainland. He'll take advantage of all of them. Xi knows that invading from the east is almost impossible. Taiwan's cliffs are well fortified. Still, he'll send some troops to the slaughter, if only to force Taiwan to destroy valuable passages and access routes into its major cities. What's the loss of a few thousand people when you have over 2 million of your active military and another 510,000 in reserve? The attempted incursions on the east can serve as a distraction. Xi's focus is on one of Taiwan's red beaches, Guanyin Beach, located on the northwest coast of Taiwan. The beach is around 31 miles away from Taipei, Taiwan's capital, and just over 10 miles away from the country's main international airport. Securing the beach will provide the most efficient route into Taipei and allow the PLA to capture an important strategic position. He just has to get the PLA to the beach. China can't use Taiwan's deep-water ports to conduct a landing or transport massive amounts of troops all at once. Tsai destroyed them immediately after Xi's missile barrage, a move the Chinese president hoped Tsai wouldn't take. But Xi was prepared for it. Instead, in the next few weeks, Xi will send dozens of transport ships toward Guanyin, each loaded with thousands of soldiers. These ships will bring his troops as close to the coastline as possible before smaller vessels take them the rest of the way. It won't be easy. Taiwan has mines in the shallow waters leading to the beach. It's also invested heavily in anti-landing spikes, preventing Xi from sending tanks until he secures the beach and can start removing the spikes. The beaches are probably already laced with mines too, and Taiwan's mobile missile launchers will batter the ships he sends, though Xi can rely on his air force to distract and destroy those launchers. Still, the landing could lead to the loss of many of the PLA's larger naval vessels. So instead of using them as transport ships, he'll call on fleets of civilian vessels to do the job. At best, those ships can carry the troops to the beach. At worst, they'll serve as distractions, draining Taiwan's munitions until it cannot defend the beach anymore. Over the next 2 weeks, China constantly sends troops to Guanyin Beach. As Xi anticipated, he loses thousands of soldiers and dozens of boats to mobile missile strikes. But he's able to respond with missiles of his own, courtesy his fighter jets, and China eventually establishes a secure route onto the beach. It's now free to land troops at will, though each crossing of the Taiwan Strait takes several hours and leaves his ships exposed to 141 F-16 fighter jets. Xi's J-16s and Su-30s are tasked with keeping those jets occupied and shooting as many out of the skies as possible, as China transports more and more troops to Guanyin Beach. Days 31 to 40. Tsai anticipated almost all of this. She knew that Guanyin Beach would fall, but she made sure the defenses lining the beach caused as much damage to the PLA as possible. Eventually, she also had to order the collapse of the passes and access ways running through the eastern cliffs, as the PLA kept sending troops. Again anticipated, though unfortunate. She needs to keep them at bay until help arrives. Taiwan's terrain will help them there. To get to Taipei, Chinese troops must pass through mountainous land, including Yongmingshan National Park. Practically all the districts surrounding Taipei present difficult marching conditions for Chinese troops. The terrain is rough. That buys more time for Taipei, which essentially sits at the bottom of a crater surrounded by mountainous land. These mountains are also an advantage for another reason. Taiwanese troops know them. The Chinese, despite their claims of ownership, don't. Taiwan's army has trained to fight in those mountains for decades, with Tsai knowing that she could trust her soldiers to hide out and wage a campaign of guerrilla warfare against China. She knows that China has sheer numbers, almost 10 times the ground troops in fact, but the mountains make it harder for planes to fly over Taipei, with the terrain making it extremely difficult for tanks and other military vehicles to travel. Add to that small pockets of hidden troops conducting sneak attacks when China's patrols least expect it, and she's confident she can put another big dent in the PLA before it reaches Taiwan. Still, she knows the numbers are overwhelming. Her troops set up choke points at every route leading into the city. Some of those choke points will be busier than others. China has yet to land troops in the south, and it would take several days for them to travel toward Taipei if they did, allowing Tsai to focus her efforts on the arriving force from the northwest. The idea is to fortify the city, creating layers of defense that China has to break before it can seize Taipei. Along the way, Tsai might have to destroy tunnels and highways leading to the city, cutting Chinese troops off from one another and forcing them to engage in small street-level skirmishes. Same goes for Taipei's port, which runs along the Tamsui River. Destroying that while blockading the river itself prevents China's navy from encroaching. It's all about buying time. Days 45 to 59. It didn't take long for Biden to convince Kishida of the importance of directly supporting Taiwan. This isn't like the situation in Ukraine, where the US can rely on its European allies to continue funneling money to support the war effort. Taiwan is cut off by a naval blockade. The US, with help from Japan, needs to break that blockade and disrupt the flow of troops to Taiwan's mainland. Over the last few weeks, the US has been sending ships to its bases in Japan, supplementing the equipment there and the 53,000 troops it already has stationed in the country. Its bases such as Okinawa are its focus. That's where a joint naval and air force attack will launch. The US knows that China has more boats in its navy, but it also knows that many of those boats are weak patrol vessels. America has the advantage of sheer tonnage and attack power. At 4.5 million tons, the US Navy displaces around twice the amount of water as China's. Its ships are better, they hit harder, and with the support of ships from the Japanese self-defense forces, Biden is confident that he can cripple the naval assets China has in the Taiwan Strait. The naval counterattack begins. A fleet that includes submarines, destroyers, and 2 of America's 11 aircraft carriers sails toward the Taiwan Strait. Japan ships don't attack directly. Instead, they offer support via their fleet of 36 JM-SDF destroyers, each equipped with RIM 162 Evolved Sea Sparrow missiles, or ESSMs, that have a 31-mile range and can move at speeds up to Mach 4, ideal for shooting down Chinese fighters and missiles aimed toward the American fleet. America loses some ships along the way in small skirmishes, but with much of China's naval firepower focused on the Taiwan Strait, It isn't until the United States reaches that patch of water that the naval battle intensifies. American destroyers focus on the smaller patrol vessels that make up much of the Chinese Navy and its blockade, while its submarines infiltrate the waters to engage in underwater battle with China's fleet. Slowly, America's sheer tonnage overwhelms the blockade, creating an opening that enables portions of its fleet to reach the routes that China has established into Taiwan. China can't risk launching missiles against America's ships. It might hit its own transports, killing thousands of its troops in the process. Instead, it becomes engulfed in a combined naval and air battle, its forces equally matched with the U.S. The objective for the U.S. isn't a complete victory, it's a disruption. Cut off the flow of troops to Taiwan and allow Tsai to execute her plan within the country. Day 60. Tsai knows the American Navy is in play. Reports from scouts observing Guanyin Beach have told her that the flow of troops into the mainland is faltering massively. That is great news for Tsai. China's missile barrages have slowed down as well, likely due to the combined issues of lower supply and those missiles now being dedicated to attacking the U.S. Navy. With a little more time, China may be unable to deliver more troops to the Taiwanese mainland. That'll leave those who have landed, numbering in the tens of thousands, to fight against the nearly 150,000-strong defensive force. Again, Tsai has prepared for this. Her guerrilla fighters in the mountains have done their jobs, picking away at Chinese troops as they advance. Access into Taipei became a choke point, and though the Chinese eventually broke through, they lost thousands of soldiers doing so. Now the next part of the strategy, urban warfare. Taiwan has been conducting mock urban street battles for years, with Taiwanese troops simulating China's likely strategies so that counterforces can practice using the city's terrain against them. All of that practice comes to the forefront now. Sandbag barricades have been erected. Munitions to deal with Chinese tanks and military vehicles are prepared. Tsai's army is so well drilled that it knows how to use the city's houses and commercial buildings as cover to launch sneak attacks on Chinese troops unfamiliar with the city's layout. All streets have been evacuated. The frequent drills, including those reported on by Reuters in July 2023, have led to much of the city being evacuated quickly and easily, with Taipei citizens traveling to the relative safety of Taoyuan, Hsinchu County, and Miaoli County. Those who remained have found shelter in the subways or in their own homes. Fighting begins in Taipei itself. The combat takes place street by street. China can't rely on overwhelming numbers here. Frankly, it doesn't have them, thanks to the many obstacles Taiwan put in its way and the Americans doing such a good job of cutting off its route into Guanyin Beach. Chinese troops are also exhausted from the long trek and the constant stress of attacks by guerrilla forces as they attempt to negotiate the mountainous terrain into Taipei. And it's not just the Taiwanese military with which they have to contend. Thousands of civilians have stayed behind in Taipei to join the fight. Many have military training, thanks to Taiwan's mandatory military service. Most have a year of active service under their belts. Younger members of the population have trained for 18 months. Fueled by national pride, they engage Chinese troops along with members of Taiwan's active military. Day 90. The fighting draws out the war far beyond China's expectations. 3 months have passed and Taiwan, aided by the Americans and Japanese, has defended itself well. America has succeeded in cutting off troops and supplies to the Taiwanese mainland, leaving Beijing to rely on the members of the PLA who managed to get into Taiwan. Those numbers are rapidly dwindling. Around 100,000 troops made it across before the U.S. Navy got involved. They face similar numbers of troops in Taiwan, along with numbers of trained citizens, and the prospect of America bringing troops to the island is a real possibility. Xi places his head in his hands. His invasion has failed. He underestimated the will of the Taiwanese people and didn't account for the U.S. sending such a strong counterforce. He doesn't even have the nuclear option at his disposal. He wants to control Taiwan, not destroy it. Faced with no other option, Xi is forced to call a ceasefire and withdraw his troops. He retreats to lick his wounds, but he can take solace in the fact that he's weakened Taiwan, as well as depleted American resources, and now he knows what mistakes to avoid if he wants to make a future invasion successful. Now check out why China's artificial islands are now sinking, or watch this video instead.